what did the rules look like in historical times when it comes to fencing competitions and fighting where you're not actually fighting to the death? Today, I'm going to talk about that.
And you shall find me a grave man.
You ready, gentlemen?
In our modern rules today, we usually allow for one after blow. And that means that when you've hit your opponent, you cannot just stop fighting because the opponent actually has one tempo, one action to hit you back. The reason for that is based on the idea that one blow does not necessarily kill the opponent, and there's plenty of proof of this from records of crime and fighting, both historically and today. So that's the idea behind the afterblow rule. Now, we often take a lot of pride in this in the historical fencing community because it separates us a little bit from modern Olympical fencing, where the person who initiates the movement has the right of way, meaning that if you hit each other almost simultaneously, the person who started the action will have the right to that point. And in all the other cases, it's basically who hits first who gets the point. So that's a bit of a difference in that. There are arguments for both sides, you could say. But the thing with the afterblow is also that what is to say that the action stops after that blow as well? A lot of the fighting that we're seeing in real life is tumultuous and a lot of things is going on, and it doesn't just stop. Now, the problem with introducing that in competitions is that it tends to get very, very violent and chaotic, and it's not very easy to judge. It's almost impossible to judge. You can do it in, for example, the historical medieval battle scene. What they do is when you fall over, then you've lost. And there are historical records of that actually being the case, where you're unhorsed or you fall to the ground, you've lost. In historical boxing rules, the London prize play rules, I believe, when the person is knocked over, that's actually what indicates one round. And he then gets 30 seconds or so to get on his feet again and continue with the next round. So we see these types of rules historically as well. And we've discussed continuous fencing quite a lot, both in articles and in previous podcasts here on Historical Fencer. But I'd like to talk a little bit about a version of continuous fencing, or frequens motus, as we like to call it, where you're using a set of Gänge or rounds for the competition. So basically what you're doing is that each of the fencers during one round gets to hit the opponent a certain amount of times. Now what this does is that just because you've been hit or hit the opponent doesn't mean that you stop. You always finish with the amount of attacks that you've got at your disposal. And an attack then can be a thrust or a cut or something like that, depending on what you allow within your rule sets, or even a cut at the blade to engage the opponent. So say that you have 4 cuts to your disposal, and the other person has 4 cuts to his or her disposal as well, and then you can separate. So if you're struck during that time, it doesn't matter, you have to continue until you've used all of your cuts. Historically, this was used from quite early on. We know that fighters would ride, for example, and break 3 lances, and we know the historical fencing rules in Germany, I think possibly in Franco-Belgian rules as well, but at least in Germany, where they would fence then to the highest bleeding wound. So you go and you have a set of Gänge, and then you see who's got the highest bleeding wound. We also know this from Mensur fencing, where you have a set of cuts that you're allowed to exchange before, and then you see basically the who can withstand that without shying away, but it's the same sort of principle. Now, the Gänge system affects fencing in a few ways, which is quite interesting. First of all, if you use all of your cuts and the opponent hasn't used all of his cuts, that means that you're basically left to parrying until he has used all of the cuts at his disposal, and you reset and start over. Which is, since I've done this quite extensively, I know how that feels, being in that situation, and especially if you're fighting to the highest bleeding wound, that can be quite intimidating, knowing that you're not allowed to actually strike back. There's no way that you can stop the incoming barrage with any type of aggression. You have to rely on your defenses, and of course, you know, when you train for this, being quite good at defending the wall exercise will help you immensely in withstanding this. Now, especially in historical times, or for example in Mensur, when fleeing or going backwards might not be seen as very courageous, you have to stand your ground. That can be very, very intimidating. With modern protective gear, it's of course much less intimidating, but still, you get the point. It puts you in a very awkward spot. So that also means that if you're attacking the opponent, you have to plan that attack, and that's one of the benefits of continuous fencing, where you have to balance your attacks by planning how you enter into distance, what you're doing within distance, and how you get out of distance as well. Well, the same with Gänge. If you don't have that many cuts and you need to land a blow in order for you to score a point, then you should make sure that you're getting the most out of those cuts. So you don't just waste them and then end up in a situation where you can't even threaten the opponent, because he will know that you can no longer cut at him. So that means that you're setting up the encounter, you're going in, you're doing your attacks, and as you're pulling out, you know, you have to make sure that every movement counts. So that's quite a challenge. And what it does, really, the Gänge system, it changes how you think about fencing and what you do while you're fencing. I'm not actually saying that this is a better way. What I'm saying is that it's a version, you could say, of historical of rules which we have given to us from historical times, so that we can use them, and we should use them. You don't have to do it all the time, but I think it's very, very beneficial if you try them out from time to time. And if you're ever into fencing to the highest bleeding wound, these are the rules that you should probably go by. So that's basically it. I would encourage you to try the Gänge system and see how that works for you as part of your Frekvensmodus training or in competitions, so that you get to try out these rule sets, because I believe that they will change how you think about fencing, how you approach it, and it will make you more economical, possibly, with your movements. And of course, in historical rules, they often excluded target areas and even techniques, so thrusting wasn't allowed. With modern gear, you can still thrust and you can strike the hands, etc. And we can, thanks to the mats, we can include wrestling, for example. But wrestling sort of messes up the Gänge system, because how do you, does it count, does a throw count as a blow, or how would that work out? Well, we can find out by trying it. I would say that if you exclude wrestling, for example, it makes the rules much easier to follow. Did you like that video? I hope that you did, and if so, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. We also have a Patreon where you can support us, and a Facebook page where you can take part in discussions. That's it for now. Take care and fence well.